Why play Wraith? Well, you have a good spot for one of the reroll lines that's associated with the Wraith trait. You have a good spot for tempoing or fast 9ing because there are some high cap Wraith boards that actually can win out very easily. Or you want to play a strong comp that has good mid-game carries, but also has different late-game high cap options, so you have a little bit of flexibility so long as you're playing from ahead. However, Wraith is heavily dependent on high roll openers. What I mean by that is you have to have either good Wraith units, good Wraith items, or a combination of both in order to be indicative of a good reroll spot, or to be able to tempo with the Wraith units to get to one of those really good late game spots. Additionally, it can be really awkward if you have a bad spot as well as contested a reroll spot, because otherwise you won't really be able to play around the trait to its maximum potential. And additionally, the vertical trait is a little bit awkward if you're just trying to fit in a board that plays multiple Wraith units. Different units want different things, so it could be a little bit awkward to kind of piece together all the units because they don't easily synergize with each other. Now, if you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. On this channel, I'm normally doing TFT guides. We had a little bit of 4 fun videos with some guess the winners and some tier lists recently, but usually I'm doing patch note reviews, best comps reviews, as well as how to play guides and different aspects of the game. There's going to be updated item guides coming next week, and that's what I've been working on for a while, so be ready for those as well. Additionally, if you want to see gameplay, check out the Fenrir Gaming VODs channel. There is a couple Wraith videos because obviously it's really dominant on the current patch. So there's a Varus game from yesterday, and today I'm going to post a really exciting Malzahar game, which should hopefully help you see how that comp functions if you haven't seen it already. But anyways, what are Wraiths? The Wraith trait. Every 4 seconds, Shadow Realm strikes the 3 closest enemies, dealing total magic damage equal to a portion of your damage dealt by Wraiths. Basically, the way you should think about it is that every 4 seconds, there's like a nuke that hits 3 of the closest units. Additionally, the lowest health Wraith heals for 18% of the damage dealt by Wraiths and the Shadow Realm. So there's also a self-sustaining effect, where if you have a Wraith frontliner or even a Wraith backliner, that unit will sustain themselves with these procs every 4 seconds. Now, the 4 seconds was a huge buff in recent history. Basically, it used to be 5 seconds. That's why Wraiths are a lot more popular on this patch. The 4 seconds makes it way more consistent. Originally, I was saying it feels like it's like a huge damage or healing increase. It's not really, right? Because technically, like, you know, the amount of time is less, so then the amount of damage dealt is like less because like the time is less that you have the window to do the damage. But basically, it's just really consistent healing and damage, and it makes the Wraith trait really strong, at least on the current patch. If you're looking at the Wraith trait, it also has 2, 4, and 6 as the synergies with 20%, 40%, and 60% damage. A lot of times you end up playing either 2 or 4 Wraith, and in some cases, if you're in a really high cap spot and you can fit it in, you're playing 6 Wraith, which basically takes a lot of the damage that you're dealing, and then every 4 seconds unloads it as an extra bonus damage and healing on your Wraith units. So, when should you be playing Wraiths? This one's going to be a little bit of a cluttered slide, by the way, but I'll try my best to work through it. With items, a lot of times, items that are indicative of good spots for the Wraith units are going to help you. So for example, if you're playing around Kayle Reroll, you know, obviously crit paired with attack speed works really well on the unit. Additionally, if you're playing around some of the other Wraith units, you know, even basically like AP utility can work well on Malzahar. If you're playing Jhin, sword items work really well. The units that I'm talking about mostly are the low cost units, which will break down the boards a little bit later in the video. So that's what I mean by this slide's going to be a bit cluttered, but items, usually you're just trying to find something that works with the Wraith unit that you have. It's mostly a pairing of items with unit in front of you, and if you have that pairing, then you have a good opportunity to play Wraiths. Additionally, same thing applies with those high roll options. If you have a Wraith emblem, obviously you can play around the Wraith trait and more easily hit those higher echelon thresholds that really help you to have that extra damage and healing, or even different Ornn artifacts depending on which unit you're playing. Something like a Fishbones or a Ludens is really good on Jhin. Things like Blinding Jewel really good on Malzahar. Just being aware of what the quote-unquote win conditions are or good options are for whichever unit you're trying to play. Additionally, augments can be absolute like shit show. You can basically pick anything a lot of the time. Things like Prismatic Ticket that just help with reroll are obviously going to be good. Things like Shimmer Scale Essence work really well because obviously like getting a bunch of econ and being able to tempo with that econ could put you in a good spot for late game Wraith, which is a good option, like Fast 9 Varus, for example, because you do have the 5 cost. And then stuff like Trifecta, I think my model's blocking it a little bit, but powering up 3-cost units if you're playing around 3-cost reroll, aka Malzahar, could also work well. You're very flexible with your augments. A lot of times it's based on committing off items unit and then taking augments to support you in order to hit that. Either econ to generate the econ to hit your units, or rerolls to have the econ to hit your units, or something that's just general combat that's going to strengthen your whole board. So let's go through the unit introductions. So with the Wraith, we have 6 Wraiths here. So if we're trying to activate the 6th Wraith trait, you don't need an emblem, but you do need all of the Wraith units, including the Chase unit, which is the Varus, which is the 5-cost. In terms of the actual synergies, there's also this nice sniper synergy between Jhin and Varus, which comes into play with some boards. So there is some inter-team synergy. Besides that, however, a lot of the Wraiths, they're kind of a little bit separate in what they want, because the extra traits that they have don't really have good pairings that tie the boards together very nicely. But to break it down, we have Zac, who is a Wraith heavyweight, does healing and deals damage based on AP. We have, I'll go through the low-cost units first. We have Kayle. Kayle is a scaling unit, so this is maybe a unit that deserves its own video, but I'll try and group the Kayle into this video as well. But basically, Kayle has a unique mechanic where as you level, the Kayle gets stronger. Kayle is a reroll 1 cost. She doesn't have any mana, scales really well off attack speed, does bonus AP magic damage with her attack, so she scales really well with AP and attack speed. But then additionally, when you get to level 6, she applies Shred, which is really nice, because then you don't have to worry too much about making our magic resist penetration. And then additionally on level 9, she becomes an absolute demon. She fires these extra waves with every single attack instead of on level 6 with every 3rd attack, and she can often be a really strong high cap late game carry. So a lot of Kayle is balancing hitting the Kayle while also having enough gold to make it to level 9 to make her your primary carry. But she has like this weird cadence that makes her really strong from high roll, but obviously if you don't make it to level 9, she completely falls off and is completely useless. Then we also have Jhin. Jhin has his own reroll lines, but basically locked attack speed, and every attack just does a shit ton of damage. 4th attack becomes empowered, so he just like rips it and does an insane amount of damage on that 4th hit. We also have Malzahar. Malzahar, this patch, 15.4, absolutely broken. If you see a Malzahar, you play a Malzahar. If you see a Malzahar, you hold a Malzahar. If you see a Malzahar, you try your best to play Malzahar. One of the best units right now. Basically, he adds this damage over time effect to units every time he casts. While he casts, if the infected target dies, then that infection or that damage over time effect then gets applied to other units on the board. He also applies the infection to every uninfected target. So if you get the Malzahar going and you apply infection to everybody, then the infection starts to stack. As they die, the infection stacks more. And I always describe Malzahar, at least in the previous videos, it's kind of like a house of cards, right? As soon as one unit falls on your opponent's side, the infection now spreads or stockpiles, and then it becomes like multiple damage over time effects. Then the next unit dies faster, then it spreads more, next unit dies faster, and it all comes crumbling down. So a lot of Malzahar is about stalling out long enough to get the damage over time effect going, and then you're just trying to get one unit to die. As soon as one unit dies, the whole board collapses. So it's kind of like nothing, 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 boom, you just won the round instantly. So you gotta pay attention to that, and it's what really makes him strong, because he's at that point where he has enough damage to actually get that effect to go off in most games. And then we have Varus. We have K'Sante as well. K'Sante revives himself, extremely strong. Does like a little bit of damage when he revives himself, because he turns into like a damage melee kind of user. But he's just a really good tank. Almost every board plays K'Sante if you can, because he's a reviving 4 cost, so he's a decently strong tank that also revives and has decent synergy and protector. And then lastly, we have Varus. Varus is the high cap unit. He has this effect where he gains mana. And then when he kills units, he gets some more mana. So the way it kind of works is a little bit weird, but basically he has an active. He does like firing these arrows. It has some attack speed scaling, but typically you just build him with like crit and like mana, because basically every arrow costs mana. So he reaches his full mana and then he starts shooting arrows and it depletes his mana. So stuff like passive mana regen work well, because once he's in that ult phase, you can also squeak out a couple extra arrows if you generate some mana in between as he's shooting the arrows off. But basically he does an insane amount of damage. It also has piercing, which means that it goes through a lot of the enemies. So you can often snipe backline units as well. A really good unit, and often is one of the high cap units that you try and play if you're trying to play around 5 cost fast 9 type of board. Anyways, let's go through our final board options. So when we're talking about the final boards, I'll try and put timestamps in this video because this one is a little bit more involved than some of the other how to play guides, and I understand that. But basically, you have 3 reroll units and 1 fast 9 option. So if we're breaking down what you want to play with the Wraiths, a lot of times it comes down to which units you're trying to play around, right? Kayle obviously wants different things than Jhin, then wants different things than Malzahar, then wants different things than the Varus. So a lot of times when you're trying to build your items, build your board, it's usually going to come down to, am I playing Kayle Reroll, am I playing Jhin Reroll, am I playing Malzahar Reroll, or am I fast 9ing to play around Varus, because these are your main carries. Zac and K'Sante are always around for the ride. K'Sante, excuse me, is not like an easily playable unit because he's contested by everyone because he has a really good 4 cost. But most of the time, we're not going to talk about like K'Sante carry, because there are options like that. He has a fruit that puts him in his all-out passive instantly, which turns him into like a really powerful melee carry. That will be maybe its own video if it becomes relevant, but we're not going to talk about that here. Instead, we're going to break down each of these lines, starting with Kayle. So Kayle, you typically play it as a reroll with Juggernaut. The reason you play it with Juggernaut is because you have the inter-team synergy of Juggernaut Duelist with the Udyr, and Duelist is really important on Kayle because of her attack speed scaling. When you're playing Kayle, a lot of times you're trying to reroll for a Kayle 3-star, or you're trying to high roll into a Kayle. This comp usually requires you to have a really good Wraith opener, such that you can play around the Kayle and easily hit that Kayle. The reason is that you need to make it to level 9. If you're spending a lot of gold rerolling, then you're not going to have the gold to make it to level 9, and then the Kayle's going to fall off, and you're likely going to have a really rough time. So if you're committing to Kayle reroll, you want to either be in a lobby where lots of people are playing 1 cost or holding on to them, and it's going to be easier for you to see the 1 cost and hit the Kayle, or you're going to start it from like a worth the wait or a high roll spot where you have a lot of Kayles. That's really obviously going to be a Kayle spot, or some sort of reroll augment that's going to give you a good option for that Kayle. When you're playing Kayle, good items. Gwynsu, it's not necessary. I like to just do it because I think that it works nice, especially if you're playing this type of Juggernaut board. But usually you're going Gwynsu and crit. So Gwynsu, something like Jewel Gauntlet, and then something like a Striker's Flail. Right? She does really well with crit, because basically if you make it so that she's critting with all of her attacks, her waves are also going to crit if you give her the Jewel Gauntlet. So then all these auto attacks that she does is extra bonus AP damage. Now you're making that AP damage do crit, which is really powerful. So getting the Gwynsu, obviously she stacks up as the fight goes on. She's going to get to a point where she's absolutely pumping damage. And obviously if you make it to level 9 where she's shooting the waves, she's now doing these waves that shoot through enemies, could hit AoE, do a lot of damage, and then also now with the scaling attack speed, it's like directly proportional. She like instantly does like a shit ton of damage as long as she attacks faster. The crit works really well, and then Strikers gives her good item pairing in order to help her to have like a full crit effect. However, currently on the patch, Giant Slayer is really strong for multiple reasons. Number one, it just got buffed, so the base damage amp is a little bit higher. It also makes it that the final damage amp is really good. It also gives good stats in terms of the attack damage, ability power, and attack speed. So Giant Slayer is one of the best items on the current patch in my opinion, and it's something you should be very like okay with slamming at a lot of points. Additionally, this patch is very reroll heavy, so doing the extra damage against tanks actually works out really nicely because you're trying to like tank bust a lot of the time this patch, so it's generally a really good item. So sometimes you'll see a build that looks like this. In certain tempo spots with Kayle, you might not even have Gwynsu. You might also just be able to build like a really heavy bow item, something like a red buff that just gives a huge amount of upfront attack speed. Stuff like this also typically works okay on Kayle. I just prefer if you're playing like a front line like this where you're trying to stall out and have the Kayle like kind of burst through everybody. Something like a Gwynsu obviously is like a little bit better because you'll like out DPS at one point. But just know on current patch, Kayle with multiple bow items and no Gwynsu also seems okay. Like I said, it's a little bit more risky because it really relies on you having the damage and the throughput in order to like make sure that you're able to like keep up. But if you're going for like El Clasico, it's usually these two items, and then third item, something to scale her up a little bit more. You don't have to build Shred, so don't worry about Void Staff or anything like that because she has built-in Shred, but Anti-Heal can work well. Even Ornn Artifacts can work well on her. Obviously, she's a really good holder of Static Shiv because she has like good AP scaling and auto attacker, so this works really nice on her. And then also Flicker Blades, obviously. Attack speed item makes her go nuts, right? Flicker Blade will be great. In terms of your front line, a lot of times when you're playing this, you actually go for Zac 3-star, Aatrox 3-star. Aatrox works really nicely with this build because obviously you're going to get the ability of Juggernaut and Heavyweight. You might look at it and think like, why don't I just play Heavyweight Zac? It's mostly because you need to fit in Duelist, so Juggernaut just works really efficiently in order to fit in the Duelist later. The Zac doesn't matter that much late game, even though with the Wraith procs, he's going to be healing and stuff. You don't care too much about that because the Wraith healing is, like, a lot of it usually goes into making sure your Kayle doesn't die randomly. You can also build Edge of Night, by the way, on Kayle if you're worried about backline access, so that's, like, another option. If you're worried about like the Wraith proc not being enough to keep her alive, because you're basically like a one-person show with a comp like this. But typically you roll for your 1 cost. As soon as you hit anything 3-star, you usually start to push levels. Late game, you can cap out pretty high with extra Wraith units on your board. Additionally, if your front line is strong enough and you're just lacking some damage and you have decent damage items, you can drop some of these Juggernaut units and you could just play like 4 Juggernaut, and you can even go for 6 Wraith, right, with the Cassante and the Malzahar as well. Here I put in Jhin. Jhin also isn't that essential. If you have a Cassante upgrade, you don't really worry about Sniper too much. You can even play the Cassante over that. But usually your late game cap is on level 9. You're going to dual carry with the Varus. Varus items, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but usually you're going for mana gen and crit. So it's usually like a full crit build like this, just to make sure that he's absolutely pumping and doing an insane and absurd amount of damage. But typically with Kayle, you're playing it from a spot where you're able to like hit those high caps, hit the Kayle, and then also tempo level. In terms of fruits, we'll just, I just want to try and find it. Fruits, with Kayle, there are a couple, like this one, Final Ascent, right, where you get extra upgrades on level 7 and 10. So level 7 you gain the stacking ability power, which is similar to like an Archangel's, but actually could be a little bit stronger in some cases. And then you also have this level 10 where you launch 2 additional waves. I think Final Ascent usually is a little bit bait. A lot of times I'm usually just going for something like over 9,000 just to get like proper scaling if I'm starting with like an early game Kayle. But additionally, sorry, I'm just zooming out a little bit. Anything that really helps the Kayle do damage, you can also go for like critical, I don't know what it's called, critical threat if you don't have a crit build on the Kayle already. I think that like a lot of times this is a little bit bait, the Final Ascent, because you're basically sacrificing a lot of rounds. You're basically playing down a fruit the first couple of rounds. So it can sometimes be a little bit awkward. Right, there's also Final Form. This is the same idea, right? Like these ones, they're good if you're really high roll, because like obviously if you have like a Kayle 3 instantly, let's say you have Worth the Wait Kayle, this one's obviously going to be really good because you don't have to roll a single time. You can just put all your gold into pushing levels, then you get the extra power at level 7 and level 10. It's like a no-brainer. Same idea with this, right? Or similar idea, right? So just be careful when you're picking them. Don't get baited by these ones. Actually make sure that you're strong. A big part of this comp is making sure you're winning early game rounds, because obviously you have to hit the Kayle and make it to level 9. If you don't make it to level 9, you're probably dead. And if you make it to level 9 and you don't have a good front line, you're also probably dead. Of course, you could also pivot this whole board, get rid of the Juggernauts, and play like a fast 9 board, which we'll talk about later. But that's just generally like the advice I would give. Just be careful with it. Next, we have Jhin. So this one's a little bit different from Kayle in that this one's probably the most consistent of the Wraith reroll comps. Basically, you're playing around Jhin with Protector Sniper activated. Sorry, I'm missing a unit here. I'm missing the Gnar. I'm going to put all of these late game units off to the side. Typically, your early game looks something like this, where you're playing all these 1 costs and Jhin. What you'll notice, though, is that Crew is activated. Crew is really important for this comp. Basically, the way that you play it is kind of like a Crew reroll. You start the game off by having Malzahar Sivir a lot of the time. That's a good indicator of this comp. And you're basically going for Malzahar 3, Sivir 3. The Crew bonus will make it now that your rerolls are going to be really efficient, because if you hit one of them 3-star, now you're going to gain XP as you roll. And then additionally, if you get 2 of them 3-star, then you're also going to get free rerolls per round, which works out really nicely. A lot of times what you're going to do is you're going to try and stabilize around Malzahar. You're going to build items that will eventually go on Jhin, put them on the Sivir or the Gnar. You can even go for Gnar 3, Kennen 3. You can 3-star everybody because they're very cheap. It's not that expensive to roll the 1-stars. And as you're rolling, you roll for Jhin as well. So typically you're going to roll on level 4, level 5. You're going to keep rolling on level 5. Even though it's a Jhin reroll comp, you don't worry about Jhin. You collect the Jhins as you're rolling because it's way more efficient with your gold to just use the crew bonus of gaining the XP as you roll. You keep rolling on level 5. When you hit the crews, you roll until you level to 6, and then you keep rolling, and then it slowly allows you to push levels. You'll hit the Jhin because it's not that expensive. When you have Jhin, then Jhin becomes your carry, and this becomes the Jhin carry comp. That's kind of how the cadence works. That's usually how it goes. And once you hit the Jhin and you have all your 3 stars, you can then just use your gold to push levels to go for 4 protector, obviously find the Cassante so you have the Wraith synergy. Obviously it says 3 Wraith here, that's because I'm showing the Varus. Varus is a late game cap. A lot of times you play Jinx and Neeko, because Neeko obviously a protector, ties in the synergy, and then Jinx could be your secondary carry. This Sivir falls off, she sucks. Same with Gnar. A lot of times you're going to dual carry between Jhin Sivir, or you're going to be dual carrying between Jhin Varus, depending on how high roll you are. In terms of items, with this comp, a lot of your early game is dependent on Malphite being really strong. So Malphite loves to have armor items because he actually does an insane amount of damage with armor items. Additionally, has a passive where he gains extra armors for items equipped. So having 3 items on Malphite early really helps because he gets a lot more tanky with those extra items. In terms of Malzahar items, a lot of times it's some rendition of chainmail items that are going to be good on him. Obviously, if you have something like the Bramble Augment, right, where you gain a Bramble Vest. Let me go to Augment so I can show you real fast. Augments, right? Thorn-plated armor. This is like extremely good. It's extremely strong on Malphite, right? Because you're obviously going to gain the Bramble Vest, which scales him really well. But this also is a really good early game augment because you just do so much damage with the Bramble Vest. You can often easily streak with it, which is really helpful for this particular comp. But either way, a lot of times you'll see a build that looks something like this: Bramble, Gargoyle, and like some sort of passive healing, like a protectors, or it's not a protectors, a Spirit Visage. Basically you just want this Malzahar to this Malphite, excuse me, to live as long as possible while also having some sort of chainmail items. Obviously something like Gargoyle is really efficient because you can solo frontline him. He can absorb a brunt of the damage, heal, and absorb, but this also gives him armor as well as MR, which scales him really nicely because it's a efficient use of those components. But any sort of tank items will work out well because he also gains the armor for having any item equipped. Additionally, you can have Kennen have some tank items, but usually Kennen you just put off to the side to get some stuns off. And later in the game, you could make some tank items for Cassante, but usually it's just like you deal with Malphite and then you worry about Jhin. Now, Jhin, we're going to talk about a lot of different builds for Jhin, so I'm actually going to pull up 2 Jhins here. Basically, there's 2 schools of thought. One is you build crit, one is you don't build crit. I think both are fine, and I'll explain why in a second. But usually with Jhin, you love to just build like base damage. He has so much damage amp from snipers that a lot of times just base AD is going to be really good. Things like Deathblade, extremely good on him. And then a lot of times you can build him towards some like partial crit and partial damage amp. Something like this usually works out really well. Additionally, you could just build him with like a full crit build. And you could even build stuff like Last Whisper just for efficiency. And these full crit builds also work out pretty nicely. When you're looking at Jhin, his passive is that his attack speed is locked. Sometimes you'll see people put Guinsoo on Jhin. I think that's usually like a good early game slam on both Gnar and Sivir. I don't think it's that good on Jhin. It's like okay. I wouldn't necessarily prioritize it. I know that Jhin has an effect where bonus attack speed is converted into attack damage. It's just not better than a proper damage item. A proper damage item is going to be more efficient than giving him a Guinsoo or giving him some sort of attack speed scaling item. You're just better off with like a full damage build. So don't worry too much, but if you're stuck, you can still put a Guinsoo on him. It will give him some base AD. With the build, the items are really flexible. A lot of this comp is just recognizing what items you can make and trying your best to give Jhin 3 items. Even if it has to be a Guinsoo on the Jhin, it's fine. Who cares, right? Just build 3 items on the Jhin. Make sure that he's really strong because you're playing a reroll comp and a lot of it is like curb stomping people early game, making it to Varus late game, and then you can rearrange your items and play like the high cap version if you make it to like Jinx Varus. So don't worry too much about it. Just try and build items. Now, in terms of what the optimal sets are, a lot of it depends on the fruit that you get for Jhin. So when you're looking at the fruit, I've talked about this a lot. There's two different schools of thoughts. Some people really, there's basically two fruits for Jhin that are really powerful. There is Artistic KO. This one used to be the old one. So Artistic KO, every 4th attack deals 35% more damage. Overkill bounces to the nearest enemy. Then we also have Spirit Sword, which is you gain 20% critical strike chance. Attacks that critically strike deal 40% bonus magic damage. And then additionally, there is also Attack Expert, which some people really like on Jhin, but this one I think is the lesser of the three. Usually, you're going for either Artistic KO, which is this one, or you're going for Spirit Sword. And I'll explain the difference between them. Some people think Spirit Sword is the best Jhin fruit and is the one that you should prioritize, that is the strongest. This one is really strong. Basically, you gain critical strike chance, and every attack that critically strikes, you deal 40% bonus magic damage. So if you build Spirit Sword with a full crit build such that you have a 100% crit chance, theoretically, you're doing 40% bonus damage as magic damage via Spirit Sword, which is a lot. It's basically a 40% increase to your damage output. It's very obviously extremely strong. So what a lot of people will do is you'll take Jhin, and you'll play him with crit, right? Obviously, if you get a base crit is 25, so if you give him IE, that's 35, and if you give him this, it's 20, so 20 plus 25 plus 45, right, plus the 20, you get to 100% with like an IE something else. The problem with Jhin is that his attacks are, like, his passive is that he has like this locked attack speed. Normal attacks in TFT can crit, so his normal attacks can crit. His final attack, his 4th attack, also crits. Like, part of the way that it does its enhanced damage is that it comes up in the game as a crit. So it's like, it's kind of like this weird interaction, but like IE a lot of times, it's like okay on him. That's why it's not like essential. Usually you're taking it because you're trying to get like a big amount of critical strike chance on the guy, but like you don't need IE. Like, his attacks are going to crit anyways. It's not something you need to put the IE on him to crit. So that's why, like, you'll hear a lot, especially from me, I'll say, like, it's not that good. Now, is it bad? It's not bad. Is it amazing? It's not amazing. It's, like, all right. So, like, that's what I say, like, don't worry about the items. Just make whatever you can. But if you want to be, like, super optimal, you can technically just put a bunch of glove items on him and, like, base AD items, and it will probably work out to be a stronger build, even with Spirit Sword, right? There's people that take Spirit Sword and they don't even put IE on him. There's also some, like, weird stat nuts that I'm sure might come up in the future, that, like, you know, there's some stats where it's like triple IE is like turbo bis with Spirit Sword, because every time you stack the other IE, you're getting extra critical strike damage, which then with everything critting, you get so much critical strike damage because the overspill of the 100% of critical strike turns into extra critical strike damage. Like, triple IE, like, looks like the secret, like in the rare games that they're played, looks like secret turbo bis broken on the Jhin, right? Now, obviously, what I'm saying is it doesn't really matter, right? Now, some people don't even like Spirit Sword in the first place, right? Spirit Sword obviously seems really strong. You're increasing your damage, but it does magic damage, which a lot of times you're not building Shred. So this 40% is going to be not as efficient as doing extra AD damage, because obviously if you're building Jhin, you're going to build Last Whisper. Your whole board is doing AD damage. You're not going to build like a Spark or a some sort of magic damage thing, because it's just not gonna synergize with your kit. So it's like a little bit less efficient, and it's like you know, so it's like a little bit fake, right, in terms of like how the damage is being dealt. Like, it's not like a raw 40% damage increase. Artistic KO is a little bit different. So the 4th attack deals 35% more. So this is just raw 35, but it's only on the 4th attack. Now, obviously, you're going to lose a lot of damage on your 1st, your 2nd, and your 3rd attack, and Jhin attacks pretty slow, so that can be a little bit bad. But then additionally, you get this overkill damage that bounces to the nearest enemy. The overkill damage is what's really nice. Now, obviously, because this build is more towards the 4th attack doing a bunch of damage, so you don't really need to build IE with Artistic KO, because the 4th attack is going to be empowered. It's going to activate similar to like a crit. It's fine, right? So instead, what you want is with the overkill damage, you just want to stack him with as much like base stats as possible. Like Artistic KO, you're more on the side of trying to like stack this guy to get like giga overkill, right? So that's where like Deathblade comes in. Sometimes, you know, on the some complete opposite side of the spectrum of what I was just talking about, the giga like broken shit is going to be like, why don't you just put like 3 Deathblades on the Jhin? Now, obviously, these are like meme builds. The point that I'm trying to make throughout all of this is that both of them are fine, right? And the reason that they're fine is because even though Artistic KO isn't as much damage, it's not damage wasted. That's the thing, right? If a unit has 1 HP and Jhin hits that unit that has 1 HP, the overkill damage is going to spill over. Spirit Sword won't spill over. And that happens a lot in a fight. You can watch a Jhin and you'll see a lot of times you'll be fighting a unit and they'll have 1 HP left. You're wasting an entire ult or an entire auto attack trying to kill that unit with 1 HP, even though this Jhin hits like a truck. Artistic KO makes so you're not wasting that damage, which is why some people prefer Artistic KO, because like the consistency that you lose from like the bonus damage that you get with Spirit Sword, you gain with Artistic KO in some cases. So both of them are fine. The way that I would play it is I would look at my items and then I would pick the one that my item's better fit for. If I have more crit, I would go more towards the Spirit Sword for the consistent damage. If I have not so much crit, I would go for Artistic KO. Either way, these fruits are RNG, and it's so fucking annoying when you're playing the game and you miss on your fruit. My advice is, whichever one you see first is the one that you're playing, and just call it a day. I think that there's players that are way better than me. Some of them say one's better, some of them say the other's better. There's still no consensus on which one is better. So, you know, pick your favorite player, listen to what they say. If you're listening to me, I say play either of them. It doesn't matter. If I see Artistic KO, I'm playing Artistic KO. If I see Spirit Sword, I'm playing Spirit Sword. It's like whichever one I pop the fruit and I see is the one I click, and if I see both of them, I pick the one that I have the better items for. Does that make sense? Hopefully it makes sense. That's the best way I can explain it, and that's my consensus. I spent a lot of time looking into it and looking at different builds and like combing the stats. I think that's the best way to approach this comp. So try your best there. Anyways, that's Jhin in a nutshell. Of course, what I would recommend the most is just slamming items and making sure you're strong early. Many of the builds work. All the items are kind of alright and fine on him. There are some win conditions. Fishbones is still really good on him because obviously if you can randomly snipe a backline with his really powerful attacks, you're in a really good spot. And also Ludens for the overkill. Similarly, you get that overkill. It works really well because you're not wasting any damage. Ludens, you don't even need to stack Ludens with Artistic KO. You can actually just stack Ludens with Spirit Sword in that case, because then you're not getting the problem, like you get the best of both worlds. You get like all the damage of Spirit Sword, but you also get the overkill damage as well. So that's like another thing that that you can do. So just keep that in mind as well. But with this comp, hopefully I explained it well. Very in depth, very, very detailed. Next, we are now going to talk about Malzahar. So Malzahar is a bit of a clusterfuck. This unit is so broken. I thought this was broken already. I thought these other Wraith comps were broken on the current patch. I've been trying to figure out how good Malzahar is. This unit is so broken and it's getting so much play that the stats are like completely messed up. So I have to just do this off of like my own experience and explaining it in the best way that I can, because like there's not numbers that justify it. If you want to see what I mean, it's like there's things like Malzahar 3, it says that Void Staff is +3. Right? But it's not +3 because obviously he's not averaging a 6 if you put a Void Staff on him. It's because it has like 100% play rate, so then like the stats like on items are like skewed differently, and then like other items are skewed positively, and then because like the items are usually put together, so then it cancels out and then it still averages a 3 and blah 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 blah. But this comp is extremely strong. It's extremely broken. It's really reliable, and often you're going to be trying to play around Malzahar if you can on the current patch, which is 15.4. He'll probably get nerfed next patch, but this is another comp. It's extremely flexible, has a lot of high cap potential, and could be extremely strong. So basically, when you're playing this comp, you usually play Malzahar with heavyweights, and a lot of times you're playing 6 heavyweight. You go for Darius 3, you go for Jace 3, and you go for Malzahar 3. In terms of your Malzahar items, basically this unit does so much damage and applies damage to everybody that giving him good utility items is usually enough to make him pop off. But there's lots of different Malzahar builds you can go because he's so good at doing damage that all of them seem to work really well. I prefer going something like Void Staff, Morello, just because you're going to want to build anti-heal and shred just to optimize your damage. These two items are also pretty good on him. They both give attack speed, and they do a lot of damage, and they give him a little bit of mana regen. So a lot of times something like this works really well. Specifically, anti-heal items like Morello work great because not only is like Morello anti-heal, right? It makes it so that you get less healing. It also has the burn effect, which basically chips away at the target's max health. because you have that burn effect, he's applying it to everybody. So not only does it work out to be like, you know, anti-heal on the whole board that reduces the ability of all the units to heal themselves back to full, you also apply this burn effect, which also chips them away as like bonus true damage. So it works really well as an item on him. Even though it is utility, it's it's also a really good damage item on Malzahar. Now in terms of Malzahar, the last item is very flexible. A lot of times people will put JG, just get some crit on there, get some more AP. Sometimes you'll see just some damage amp, like a Giant Slayer, chew through the front line. You'll see like just lots of AP. Archangels, you can go Archangels. Something you'll also see is actually blue buff. Blue buff, just make him cast infinite, right? The more he casts, the more he stacks infections. Just make it an absolute monster. Go blue buff. In some cases, you'll see like giga damage builds on Malzahar. You'll go like Archangels, blue buff, and you'll worry about like the other stuff another time, right? JG. Sometimes you'll see full utility, right? The last item, even though Wraith heals, you'll see the Malzahar just get a Gunblade. And this build of Malzahar is extremely strong because he just sustains the front line because he just does infinite damage as well, especially when all the infections stack. In my opinion, I would usually go for, like, if I was building Malzahar and I had a choice, I think the best course of action is typically Void Staff Morello, +1. And then whatever my +1 is, I just make it, whatever I have, because I just play it as aggressively as possible like this. Some people say Malzahar Abyss are these 3 items. Some people say that you really want to just have damage on Malzahar and you can go full damage. Additionally, some people say you want a mixture of them and just build them like more well-rounded with no mana gen and just go like, you know, something like, you know, Archangels, Morello, Shiv. But the items to me don't matter that much because the unit is so strong. Personally, I like the utility approach because it just makes it a little bit easier for you to deal with your other items in other ways, and have like enough frontline items for frontline without having to worry about making the utility in another way. Because a lot of the comps right now, especially like the really tanky ones, you really want to have anti-heal and you really want to have Shred Sunder for your comp, right? If you don't have anti-heal, especially, you're in a really bad spot. So usually with Malzahar, I'll prioritize like a Morello and maybe like something else, and then I'll worry about whether or not I'm going for mana gen or the other stuff. Mana gen's a bit weird because obviously this unit's a prodigy unit and has very low mana threshold, but the mana gen does work really well. So something like blue buff, especially, usually if you have blue buff though, I would recommend full damage because blue buff has the additional ability power bonus effect now, right? You get 10% additional attack damage and ability power from all sources. So if you're going for blue buff, I would lean more towards these damage items. I think like blue buff with utility is a little bit less impactful because you're losing a lot more damage in that regard. If you're going for like giga casting, giga damage, I would go for like giga casting, giga damage, or I would go for like full util. I'm gonna stall you guys out until I just collapse everybody and kill everything, right? But either way, lots of different builds. I'll just leave these items up on the screen while I go through it. In terms of your other units, usually you're itemizing towards Jace and Darius as well. Poppy also usually becomes a tank, especially if you hit Poppy too. 6 heavyweight Poppy is really strong, so you can put tank items on Poppy. Darius usually becomes like a pseudo carry that helps you to tank bust, because basically the Malzahar, he applies damage over time, Darius chews through a couple of the units, then Malzahar is able to stack extra infection on all the other units, and then Darius cleans up. So it has a really good synergy between these 2 units. For that reason, with Darius, you want to build him for giga damage, so a lot of times it's like Hodge, IE, right? You just want him to crit, like, so pairing crit glove items works really well. Additionally, you just give him a lot of sustain because obviously he's going to be in the front line, so you can give him like Sterix, BT. Now Darius doesn't get Omnivamp because he's a fighter. They removed his Omnivamp, so you really want to have Omnivamp on him. You can also give him survivability by means of Edge of Night, right? You have lots of options, but typically it starts with IE. You want IE on this guy because he's going to absolutely do some shit ton of damage, so you want to make sure that you have that potential. Jace, a lot of times you're building him like a drain tank. You could build him in a similar way as the Darius, but he's usually the lower priority unit. But I would say like Sterix, BT, just make him like stay alive and do a bunch of damage. And then obviously tank items on Poppy. Whoever you 3-star, if you don't have Poppy 2, you can put tank items on Jace. You can even put tank items on Darius. Even put tank items on Zac. In some cases you can go for Zac 3. This guy actually lives a long time because of the Wraith procs. So he's actually pretty good in a lot of situations to like itemize around until you hit the other ones. But typically it's the combination of Darius Malzahar that makes this really strong. Now let's talk about power-ups. Power-ups are really important with this comp. something I haven't been mentioning previously in this video is Socialite. How do you spell Socialite, man? Oh, I'm on the wrong slides. Power-ups. There we go. Socialite. Now, this one is absolutely broken. Basically, mark adjacent hexes for 4 rounds. Allies in marked hexes gain 10% damage jam, 120 health. The champion gains 200% of the bonus. This is absolutely busted, and it's absolutely absurd. So basically, if any comp could allow yourself to get Socialite, you should always try and find Socialite or hit Socialite. It doesn't matter what the comp is, it's extremely broken. Let's do a little skirt, rewind, and go back to the Kayle comp, right? If you hit Socialite on Aatrox, you're playing Socialite, right? Socialite on Aatrox is really strong. If you hit Socialite on Zac, it's really strong. Both of those are options, right? But usually you go for Aatrox as he's less important for the comp, so you can buy, sell, and go for it. It's a little bit harder to do on the Kayle comp because Aatrox is usually one of your main tank because it's a 1-cost reroll, but same thing applies. Socialite, you get Socialite activated. With the Malzahar comp that we're talking about, Socialite is available on basically these 3 units. The one that is the least important is Aatrox. So what you'll typically do is you'll just buy a bunch of extra Aatroxes as you're rolling for Malzahar. This allows you to consistently hit Socialite. This is why it's becoming a lot more prevalent, because a lot of the comps that play Aatrox, it's way easier to hit Socialite because basically you fruit the Aatrox. You see if you get Socialite. You don't get Socialite, you sell the Aatrox as soon as you hit a new Aatrox, and that way you get to save the fruit removers. And you can keep doing this because if you're rolling for Malzahar, you're rolling for Jace, you're rolling for Darius. If you're rolling for these units, you can just like buy, sell Aatroxes along the way because he's very cheap. It's only 1 gold, right? If you have the bench space, it's very easy. You don't upgrade Aatrox. You keep him as a 1-star and you just buy, sell him. And that way, you can more easily find Socialite without having to waste all your fruit removers. And if you do end up wasting your fruit removers, you can always fall back on this option to try and find Socialite. That's what makes it really reliable and really powerful. Heavyweights scale with HP. Socialite gives base HP, so that's before they get their scaling. So it's going to be extremely powerful, and it gives everybody extra damage in the form of the damage amp. So giving Socialite to this unit, absolutely broken, especially broken with this board. You basically put on the unit, you spread it around the board, make sure that all the hexes are covered, that you have Socialite, and you put all units in the Socialite square, and it makes this comp absolutely broken. It's like, not only is the comp already broken, this is what makes it like giga broken. If you hit Socialite, I want to make it very clear, I'm going to say it one more time, you go for Socialite. It is a noticeable increase in power. You don't need it, right? You can still win the game without Socialite. I'm not saying you can't win the game without Socialite, but what I'm saying is, if you're trying to optimize, you go for Socialite. You always try and go for Socialite, and maybe if you're a little bit chicken because you're like on your last Aatrox and you don't have Socialite, maybe then fruit somebody else if you really want to try, but you always dig for Socialite. It starts on stage 3, so don't do it on stage 2, obviously, but once you get your second fruit, stage 3, you dig for Socialite if you can. And especially since you're re-rolling, the odds aren't that bad. As soon as you find an extra copy of Aatrox, you just buy, sell it, right? Aatrox 2 isn't going to be the deal breaker, but Socialite will be. So you don't care too much about going for 2-star Aatrox. You keep them at 1-star, and you keep buy, selling until you hit Socialite. In terms of the fruits on the Malzahar, Shadow Clone is extremely potent. I think this one's his best one. There are lots of options as well, right? You have Max Arcana. If you get into the scaling ones, like you're starting the game with a Malzahar, all the scaling ones are really good. Max Arcana, extremely powerful because you gain extra AP per takedown. Malzahar spreads infection to the whole board, so you literally always get Max Arcana maximum, right? Like you're scaling 1% every 2 takedowns. Malzahar participates in every single takedown because he literally his whole ability is that he applies infection to every single unit, right? And if he doesn't apply infection to a unit, he applies it to an unmarked unit. So he will always be part of a takedown. So this actually stacks incredibly well and gives him a lot of base AP. So extremely good in the early game. However, if you don't have that option and you're looking for something later, Shadow Clone is really good. Shadow Clone makes a second copy of the Malzahar. Second copy applies the marks. It applies the infection effect. So if you have 2 Malzahars, you apply the infection earlier. You get to that like stacking damage over time effect that is really potent. So you always want to consider Shadow Clone extremely strong on the Malzahar. But if not, a scaling one's really good. In terms of fruits, he also has a lot of really good fruits right now, but part of it's because he's broken. Dawn Core works really well. A lot of the mana ones work really well because he just gets the infection off earlier, but Dawn Core works particularly well. Blighting Jewel, obviously, because he's doing damage over time effect. He's one of the main holders of Blighting Jewel. Now that he's really strong, it's absolutely broken on him, so Ornn Artifacts can also work really well. And then there's also some hits for some of your frontline options as well. Of course, you want to eventually hit Prodigy. This is like a level 7 board when you hit 6 heavyweight, but you can easily play Prodigy and Wraith units, so a lot of times you're capping out your board with like Yuumi, Seraphine, and just stacking Prodigy later in the game. You could also technically go for Battle Academia, but I think Seraphine is just better. But if you have a Jace 3, you can get some extra damage off if you have good Jace items with Ezreal, Yuumi as a late game cap on level 9. But I think that's a little bit of an overcook. A lot of times like the Yuumi becomes your secondary carry, or Seraphine, and you get Star Guardian in for your Poppy, and Poppy usually becomes the tank, right? Because your tank items go on Poppy, your damage item goes on these guys, and then Malzahar has his set of AP items. But anyways, that was the Malzahar comp. Now, what do you do if you're playing Malzahar and you're contested? There are some options. Malzahar is so strong that a lot of times people are actually trying to play him with 4-cost comps. This comp is becoming a little bit more popular. However, I personally think this comp sucks. I don't think it's that good. But I'm still going to introduce it to you guys to talk about 4-cost comps in this video as well. But basically, if you have a Malzahar 2, a lot of times you're winning on stage 2, stage 3, and you're trying to convert it into like a high cap board on stage 4 and 5. If you're contestant, you can't reroll Malzahar, then a decent option is to take your Malzahar that usually has like decent utility items, and then there's this board that kind of fits in. It's like Star Guardian Wraith. Basically, you're playing for deeper Wraith procs, but you also play some Star Guardians, and you basically play dual carry Jinx. A lot of it is because you have really good synergies with the 5 costs. This is why I say I don't believe in this comp that much, because a lot of times on level 8, if you try and play this comp, you're really relying on Cassante being a reliable frontline unit and finding Poppy. But Cassante, usually you can't find in time, so like he's going to be hard to find. Everybody holds on to Cassante. So this comp is a little bit unstable in the front line, and without the 5 costs, there are low cost options that give you the same synergies. Obviously, you have the Syndra and the Jhin, so you could still play this comp on a level 8, but it is noticeably weaker. A lot of this is like taking your heavy tempo, and you're kind of trying to like barely scrape by level 8, not roll too much, and convert that into like a level 9 board where then you cap out around Varus, right? For Wraith Varus, it doesn't matter what the rest of your board is, he's going to be extremely strong, and it's going to give you a really good high cap. So like your Jinx that has like, you know, a crit build, for example, like we talked about Star Guardian, you're basically just trying to bide your time, use the fact that Malzahar is really broken and you probably have a lot of HP, and then you're trying to convert that into like a Varus game on level 9. That's the way I see this comp in particular. It could also work with like Tiny Team, for example, like certain Star Guardian augments that allow you to play lower amounts of Star Guardian units, but usually you're just trying to tempo it, get to level 9, and then you play something like this, where you play like the Braum as well, or another 5 cost, and then you try and cap out around Varus being like this really powerful demon like late game unit. And in some cases you can even drop this and play more Sniper, or play more Wraith, and that's like another option. A lot of times if you're trying to fast 9, however, usually you're more aiming towards this type of board. A lot of times you're playing it from an early Gnar opener where you have a Guinsoo and a Gambler's Blade, right? Something that just generates a lot of econ because Gnar attacks really fast. And then you're trying to like late game cap around this board. This is the Fast 9 Varus board that is usually considered to be one of the strongest comps in the game, usually because it's using all good units, right? High cost Braum, really strong. What's his name? Cassante, really strong. Varus, really strong. TF, really strong. Zyra, really useful, right? So you're just tying together a really powerful board. You get Crystal Gambit in, so you get a couple gold cash outs, which helps you to hit. But this is a very expensive board. It's very situational that you can play this, especially in the current landscape of the game where there's a lot of reroll options. But if you're ever in a really aggressive tempo spot, Twisted Fate works really well with Anti-Heal and Shred, because he just applies it to everybody, but normally anti-heal. He has a really powerful effect where he's just like constantly applying these marks and exploding marks on different units. So he has really good AoE spread. Scales really well with attack speed and could be really strong in late game scenarios. So usually you're going for TF, he usually takes your attack speed items, and then Varus, usually going for some sort of mana gen with IE strikers, if we're actually being like for real, the best mana gen I think is actually blue buff, because when he ults, the blue buff will continue to give him mana, which can also make him fire a couple of extra arrows in his ult. So this mana gen is actually really powerful and really potent, because the +5 mana gen, it keeps him in his ult longer and he shoots some more arrows, which can really be devastating. But a lot of times, this is like a very rare situation, but it's something I also want to mention. If you have a fast 9 spot, if you have an insane amount of gold and HP, this is a way to convert that into a win, get to level 9, and upgrade all of your 5 costs. It does require insane amounts of gold. You need to be rolling like 80 gold on level 9 in order to find all your upgrades or something like that. So it's very, very circumstantial where this actually works out. And refer to it more of like a fast 9 comp rather than like a quote-unquote Wraith comp. Additionally, if you want to stabilize with some lesser units, you could also play some of the other Wraiths in place of these units. Obviously, like, because they're just cheaper, right? So you can just play 4 Wraith, for example, and not have like maybe the Zyra if she's too expensive and you didn't hit her. It's going to be less of a cap because the 5 costs I think are going to be better than having the 2 extra Wraiths, but it's just a way to like deal with the fact that you may be low rolled or didn't have enough gold to hit everything. So always consider that as a stabilization point. In terms of fruits for this one, on TF, Twisted, what is it? You want Sky Piercer usually, right? Sky Piercer applies Shred and Sunder, and he applies it to everybody. So this works really well because your board is doing mixed damage, right? TF's doing mixed damage. Even Varus has a little bit of AP, I think. Or no, it does physical damage only. But either way, you want to like just make it really efficient. Shred and Sunder, reduce armor and MR, make your board do a lot of damage because you have multiple sources of damage, right? Especially if you have Zyra on your board. So when you're playing this late game, Sky Piercer here. Varus has a lot of options. A lot of times it's either Shadow Clone, right? He also has a specific one called Doom Barrage, where he his arrows cost less mana, so you can shoot more arrows. But basically, usually just don't skip on Shadow Clone. And if you see one of the other ones and you have a decent build for it with mana gen, you go for those builds and you'll be fine. But anyways, those are all the Wraith boards. Very involved. Like I said, I'll try and put some timestamps to make it a little bit more clear for everybody. But additionally, if you have early game, we kind of talked about it or hinted towards it. A lot of times your early game is going to be very dependent on what you get as your opener, right? Obviously, if you have a Malzahar, you're then trying to make Malzahar items. If you have early crew, right? Early crew, often this just means you're playing Jhin, right? If you're committing to a reroll line. If you have a really good Kayle spot, so lots of Kayles, lots of Zacs, this one usually means that you're trying to play towards Kayle, but it also relates to items, right? Kayle, you want those attack speed and crit usually. Jhin, you usually want like lots of swords. And then Malzahar, you're very flexible on your items, and very rarely should you skip on a Malzahar. Because you're so flexible on items, it's really hard to miss, because even if you have AD items with Malzahar, a lot of times you're just going to be putting those items on either the Jace or the Darius later. So you actually have a lot of flexibility if you have any of these units as an opener, that you can kind of fill in the gaps with the other ones, right? If you get a bunch of rods, you make Malzahar items. If you get a bunch of swords, you make Darius items. If you get a bunch of tank items, you're still fine because you're going to need tank items eventually. You can put tank items on anybody in the front line. So this one is a lot more flexible on the items. So seeing any of these units early could be a strong indicator to play around that particular reroll line. Of course, if you start the game off with a really high roll opener, a lot of times it's like Gnar with... It doesn't work as well anymore because a lot of the reroll comps will curb stomp this Gnar in the mid game. So you're going to have a hard time making it to level 9. But if you have some sort of like giga high roll style opener where you have like a Gnar and you're trying to convert that into a win, right? And you're just playing like around some Juggernauts or something, right? This can be like a level 9 Varus TF kind of board, right? Because as long as you like have a huge amount of HP and a gold advantage, you'll be in a spot where you can potentially make it to level 9, cap out around those high costs, and very few boards will be able to outcap you or beat you in those situations. Anyways, what are our conditions for success? Obviously, early reroll options, crew Jhin, Kayle, or Malzahar. Strong econ or ability to fast 9. Specifically with Varus, this is the one that comes into play a little bit more often than others. Additionally, items that work with the reroll units are obviously going to be really good. So whenever you have a reroll spot, you want to have items that work with those units, obviously. So Kayle, if you have no bows with the Kayle, obviously it's going to be a little bit hard to play Kayle. Additionally, if you're playing Jhin and you have a bunch of AP items, it's obviously going to be hard to play Jhin. So you need to have like the combination of the two. That's why whenever I talk about these lines, I say it's usually like a high roll type of thing, because you not only have to hit the units, you also have to have items that are coherent or work well with the units, and additionally augments that also help with the units. That's what's a good indicator of reroll spots. The only one that is really like forcible or very easily able to like play into is Malzahar, because if you have items or units or augments that pertain to that particular line, there's so many different ways that you can itemize, because you're playing around a melee AD carry, and then you're playing around a backline AP, and he does so well with different items and different builds. They're all pretty much okay on him. There's some that are like a little bit better. I think like Reroll on him is obviously like really good, and blue buff with damage obviously does really well. But obviously if you're able to play around Malzahar, you should just play around Malzahar. Because the different builds are good enough that you'll still probably get a first or a second, right, if you have a good spot to actually hit the unit and you're uncontested. Additionally, if you have a strong mid game, you can keep some of the options open. I talked a little bit about this line where you go from Malzahar into Varus and you kind of use it as like an in-between stepping stone. Like I said, me personally, I'm not a big fan of this comp. I saw it a lot on scrims at the start of the patch when I was watching some of like the top level players trying to figure out the new patch. It's becoming less and less popular because as time goes on, the reroll lines are dominating it more and more. So it's a little bit of an awkward situation because it's really just preying on the fact that Malzahar is broken, but it also requires you to high roll your front line really effectively. But boards like this could also work. I've seen people play Malzahar into Prodigy, like the old Yuumi build, right? You just play all the Battle Academia units, right? I've seen stuff like this. You know, like the old Battle Academia board where you just played like Yuumi, right? And then they would just play like the Malzahar 3 here and it would be really strong, right? These are all just because Malzahar is really good. These aren't like optimal boards in my opinion. I think this board sucks compared to like a typical Malzahar board. It's just that Malzahar is so strong that you'll be able to clutch up here, but it really relies on you being uncontested and hitting the Malzahar, right? If you're hitting the Malzahar this efficiently, you should probably just play the heavyweight version on the front line if you're rolling for the Malzahar, and it'll probably be a little bit more successful. But obviously, like, you know, stuff like this also can have success because of how strong Malzahar is. But that's what I mean. If you have a strong earlier in mid game, you can keep some options open, because as long as you like hit everything, you'll be fine. And that's a lot of how Wraith is, because it's very reroll dependent on most of those lines, right? Typically, based on your opener, you can commit to one of the reroll lines if you're thinking about Wraith. Otherwise, you're looking for heavy econ or HP lead, because if you're really dedicated to play around Wraith, like you have a Wraith emblem, the only other option besides the reroll lines are to play around Varus, because there's not really like a 4-cost carry, so you're either playing around low-cost carries, which means reroll, or you're playing around fast 9ing towards Varus, which requires a lot of gold and heavy HP lead. Anyways, thanks for watching. This one was a bit longer. Obviously, it's around twice as long because we really had to break down 3 different comps instead of 1 or 2 comps. So a little bit more involved than usual. Hopefully it was fine. I didn't want to break it up into like a multi-part series. I was struggling with that myself to figure out if I wanted to make it like, oh, this is a Kayle video, this is a Malzahar video, this is a Jhin video. Instead, I just put it all into one to make it like one complete guide. I might make separate videos about each of the lines themselves in order to clarify some things, but I thought this would be a little bit more appreciated. But thanks for watching. Hopefully it was enjoyable, and have a great day. See ya. Bye-bye.